the core passage for today is from Psalms, and it's, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Now, this is a verse spoken by God, who is the perfect parent who teaches his children, but it's also what we want to say to our children. We want to counsel with our eyes upon them in order to help them develop wisdom and decision making. We can't make decisions for our children forever. So it's our job to enhance their mental capabilities, counseling and guiding them through trial decisions and through their right choices and through their mistakes. So in the introduction yesterday, I named 5 components of your child that you want to develop in order to help them reach adulthood as a functional, well-rounded adult that can make decisions. So let's dive into the mental component now. And again, it's concerned with being able to comprehend, retain, ponder, and extrapolate information, and being able to make good decisions based on that information. And we talked about some of the qualities yesterday: the desire to learn and acquire good education, curiosity, sense of humor demonstrates mental agility, mental discipline, motivation, having good mental health. These are all the kind of traits that fall into this area of mental development. So what I'm going to do is, for each component that we're going to cover over the next 5 lessons, I'm going to propose 3 commitments to make to your child to develop that area within them. Now, you may or may not actually say these to your child. I would propose that you do, but you can decide on your own, do I really want to say these? But either way, I would like you to kind of commit to those as parents, and then be able to act on them. So here are the 3 proposed components that have to do with commitments, rather, regarding the mental component. And the first is, we will help you stimulate your mind and love to learn. We will provide you with a solid grade school education and assist you in finding post-high school training and education that matches your interests and goals. And by the way, all these will be on handouts, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. I'll have the key things on a handout that I'll send out later. And we will, but take notes as you wish. I just want to not panic you. And then we will partner with you to grow your decision-making ability, in part by providing a reasonable discipline structure and encouraging increased responsibility as you age. So I'm going to talk about these a little bit, but mainly the third one, because on the first 2, I think that these get covered a lot already. You have other sources, I think, that you go to. I think it's something you spend more time on as parents. The first one is really more about developing and rewarding curiosity and that sort of thing. The second is more about mental discipline, motivation, persistence, focus, work habits, responding to deadlines and requirements. All those kinds of things kind of fit into your education as a whole. Mind stimulation also is just traveling somewhere, doing stuff as a family together, having conversations around the table that are different than what they might think, the news of the day or whatever key topics, things that are on their mind. So these things are all together there. And I think there's a lot of parenting material that will go into that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Instead, I want to spend more time on fostering your child's ability to make decisions through this reasonable discipline structure and encouraging increased responsibility as the child goes toward adulthood. Now, again, in the introductory lesson, I kind of had to skim through it a little bit, but I talked about incremental decision-making at each age with special attention to the 12 to 18 range. And if any of you are interested, you have younger children yet, and you want to put some things together, let me know. Maybe I'll go ahead and share the slides I had yesterday where they were just whipping through really quickly on 0 to 6 and 6 to 12. But I think there's strategies you can have there. And actually, when my wife and I were starting to parent, we kind of thought through how we want different things to go at each age. And when they were younger, we would actually tell them, but it just bounces off when they're younger. When they got older, they start realizing it a little bit more. So I do have material, just a few ideas on the earlier ages. But 3 strategies to keep in mind as you do this. I covered this yesterday, but just to refresh you, making it a partnership. My recommended approach is partnering with your teen to grow their own ability to make decisions. And it's really a different approach than most people take, because we just have this classic parent-child tug of war kind of thing that can happen. And I don't think it has to be that way. It may wind up that way yet, but I don't think it has to be that way, especially if we go into it very intentionally. So you're wanting to help them see that they're just 4 years away from making decisions on their own, and high school is a time to learn and practice. The second is teaching that process of decision making, such as what questions to ask, issues to consider when making a decision. And then I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we'll say some more later about it. Consequences of their decisions are growing and growing, even to the point of life and death. Um, I don't know if any of you have kids who are a little older. I think a couple of you do, actually, because it's your second time through. And you may recall, I don't know if I think it was 2018 when we had that tragic accident right outside St. Andrew, where the kids were racing and two girls died. And in fact, when I left yesterday, I drove by and looked at that stump again as we went out. And it was something that, it was just a decision in a moment that changed not only those two lives, but a lot of lives around them. So young brains are not always thinking about these consequences. We'd like them to, but they really don't. So anyway, I want you to ponder a model for teaching decision making and for your role as a parent. And that's what I want to spend most of the time on today. And it can be complicated, this particular model that I'm going to show you today. And it's probably the most complicated thing I'm going to show you also all semester. So don't think that, oh man, everything's going to be like PhD level or something. But this one is a little bit more complicated. But I think if you can study it further offline from your class handouts and everything, it'll make sense and be quite useful. And it's actually based, it's something I came up with based on a well-known management technique from the business world that now I'm applying to parenting. And it's a technique I used in business. In business, it's called situational leadership, if you've ever heard of that. But within parenting, I'm calling it adaptive parenting. And here's how it goes. So there are four stages that your child, or really anyone, can be in when they're making decisions in a given area or learning about a given area or have a new task area that they're going into. And it doesn't matter what area it's in. Maybe your child can be accomplished in one area, but still learning in a different area. And so it's a model that is flexible to where they are in whatever their context is. So a person typically will start in this lower right-hand corner in the orange block, and hopefully they follow that arrow around and increase their competence to be more proficient. So let's start in the orange block. And in this case, your child is both not able, not equipped for the task, and also maybe not willing or not confident to do the task. And in this case, you're telling the child what to do, and typically they want direction. They need your guidance. In the yellow one, the child is not able or equipped for a given task, but they're willing or confident enough to try. Maybe too much so at times that they have to be convinced on how to do the task. So in this stage, you are selling your child on your ideas and how to do it a certain way or do it your way as they're learning. The blue area is where the child, this is kind of interesting. This one is the child is able or equipped to do the task, but they don't have enough confidence. They're not willing or confident, and they need some belief in themselves. And in this case, you want to participate with the child side by side. You help them take the lead while you function as a sounding board and as a safety net. And you'll find yourself really being a cheerleader and an encourager quite a bit in this phase. And then the green is the child is able or equipped for a given task and willing and confident. And this is when they've really come full flower in this area. You're delegating to them and you just kind of monitor what they're doing. They need very little interaction with you at that point. So also note that, again, it's just like all of us. Your child's going to have some areas where they're going very well and other areas where they're not. It's just like me. I'm not very mechanical. I was talking to somebody yesterday who had software and hardware background. I said, I was always a software guy, not a hardware guy. So there's some areas I'm confident in, other areas I'm not, right? Everybody's like that. So you want to adapt your parenting to where the child is in different ways and try to advance their skills and their decision making along the way. You can see that this can be general purpose for a lot of different areas. But let me use something as an example, cooking. Okay, so when they're little, you may just tell them what to do in the kitchen, assign them less complex tasks, you safeguard the child, you direct all the actions, you're telling everything. Then as they get a little older, they may be more confident. Maybe they want to experiment. The kitchen is, my wife said yesterday, the kitchen is like a chemistry class when you get down to it, right? So it may be someplace where they want to experiment, but they're still limited in their ability. And you want to persuade them to do it a certain way. And govern the experimentation. You may not want them to try to fry an egg right on the burner, right? But if they botch a recipe and it tastes bad, that's a low consequence kind of thing. They learn from that. So you're trying to figure out the best way to teach them, let them make a few mistakes, but at the same time, you're trying to coach them in the right direction. And then participating. This is where the ability is there, but they're not yet confident enough. Maybe it's time for them to pull off a more complex meal on their own, and they just don't know how to pull all that together. And so they're not very confident. So that's when you're with them kind of side by side in the kitchen as a safety net. Let them be the main driver, but you're filling in the gaps, helping them. And again, helping them see the decisions. And when they get stumped, you're helping them through a few things there. And then delegating. This is when you just ask them to make dinner, or maybe they even volunteer on their own. So that's the ideal, right? So that's one part of the model. Now I'm going to overlay the model with the concept I call solutions orientation. And this is an important life skill. What do I mean by solutions orientation? Well, simply put, life is always presenting a series of problems to solve. And you hear people talk, how many times have you heard people talk about, I don't want to adult today. Oh, I'm so tired of adulting, right? They're either tired of solving problems, or frankly, they may not know how to solve a problem. And it's always daunting to have to solve that new problem. So we want our child to grow up to be a problem solver and to be oriented towards finding and implementing solutions in their life, and confidently make decisions and be good at this thing we call adulting. So the level of solutions orientation kind of pairs with these boxes. So in the orange box, the child is too inexperienced to identify solutions to problems yet. In fact, they may not even be able to clarify a problem or identify possible solution alternatives. I'm not talking only at 6 years old. They could be 14 and not be able to, because they don't have the experience level. So this goes along with they're not able and also not confident. So at this level, again, you're growing their ability to identify the problem and identify the alternatives. And that's where the arrow is going up there on the right side. At the cell level, the child can identify problems and alternatives, but maybe not the best alternative. They're more willing and confident to make a decision and go with it, but they're not able to select the best one to go with. So they make wrong decisions. And here you're wanting to coach them to evaluate and rank alternatives, learn pros and cons, and show them a more structured way to think about their solutions or things they should consider when they're ranking these alternatives. So at that point, you're getting them over towards the blue box, and the child can identify problems and the best alternative, but may have difficulty in carrying things forward and implementing the solution. Now, it could be motivation. It could be that they're not willing, so it's motivation, or it could, again, be a confidence problem. So at this level, you're pushing them, encouraging them, trying to help them with their productivity, task completion, those kinds of things. And you may be focusing on organizational skills, focus, not allowing them to procrastinate. Sometimes, you know how it is, we may procrastinate because we're just uncomfortable about our ability to follow through. So that's why we don't want to do it. And then once the child has kind of mastered themselves, they arrive at square four. They're able, willing, confident, able to proactively identify problems and alternatives, select the best alternative, and implement the solution to the finish line. So let me give you an example from my daughter Rebecca's gymnastics career. She had participated for several years. It was about the time she had a lot of success. won a state title at a certain level, was entering 7th grade, but it was starting to get harder for her for several reasons. And her body was breaking down a little bit. And part of it, she was also starting to fall behind competitively. And probably more important, she was starting to realize there was life outside of gymnastics. She was getting into middle school. You spend all your time in the gym in gymnastics. And so as a middle schooler, more options were there for her. And at this point, probably at this point going into 7th grade, these were kind of vague feelings. So she didn't really understand she had a problem. So I was helping her kind of identify and articulate this as she went forward, and put it in her head to start thinking about the day when she might not do gymnastics anymore. And it took about a year just going through. And again, for me, whether she did it or not was not so critical. The main thing was for her to understand that there was a problem and how she was going to go about seeking the alternatives and coming to a solution for herself. So she started identifying the problem better, started playing around with some alternatives, and we were getting to the point she was about to go into 8th grade, and suddenly she was in a position to pretty quickly race through the rest of this model. And the next thing I know, she's posting on Facebook her 9 reasons for quitting gymnastics. And she said, I've decided to quit, and here's my 9 reasons. And they were well thought out. They were mature. It was clear she made a decision and she wasn't going back. And I have to tell you, I was as proud of her on that day as I was for anything that she accomplished in gymnastics. So now I realize that this model, there's a lot more things showing up on the screen, and I hope you can see some of the advantages of using it. One of the biggest things is you now have 2 ways to identify where your child is in their decision-making development in a given area. First, you can assess their ability and their willingness or confidence. That's the inner boxes. And then you can look at how they handle problems and solutions, and that's the outer boxes. So there's a couple of different things that can tell you where your child is and what they might need out of you. So now I have one more overlay, which is, I call it Stucker streaming, and you see it kind of on the left side. You might use this in any of the 4 boxes, but you'll find it a lot on the left side there with participating and delegating. And let me explain to you, this comes out of something I learned in my long experience in business as a people manager. All day long, people would come into your office and they have a problem. And if you're not careful, you wind up taking on their task and solving their problem. So what you need to learn how to do as a manager is, instead of hearing a problem and trying to fix it, how can you enable your team to go out and fix things? And the same thing can happen as parents. We're tempted to solve all the child's problems ourselves, but we want to grow their ability to solve their own problems. So this is where Stucker streaming comes in. And it's really a listening technique to determine whether they're stuck or they're streaming. So here's what it sounds like when someone is stuck. They'll say things like, I really don't know what to do next. I'm fresh out of ideas. I thought this idea would work, but it's not working out. I keep trying this plan and I'm working so hard, but it feels like I'm getting nowhere. These are the signs that someone is stuck. And here's what you do, and it's very important, okay? Because this is where you normally jump in and solve the problem yourself. And sometimes you will. It depends on the complexity of the problem or whatever. But it's great if you can ask them how they are going to solve the problem. How are you going to solve this problem? And you get them to thinking about reframing the problem, identifying and ranking alternatives, that kind of thing. Where are they going to go to find useful information? Who is somebody, or where is somebody where's something that can give them ideas? You could give them an idea, but not a solution. Like, you might explore this area, that kind of thing. And when they leave the conversation, they should have the beginning of a plan. Now, they may be mad at you because they wanted you to solve their problem, because you didn't just hand them the answer, or you didn't do it for them. And sometimes there's times to do it for them and hand them the answer. But what we're doing in this model is we're trying to figure out how to grow this individual into adulthood and not solve all their problems for them. So now, how do they sound when they're streaming? Well, they'll say things like, well, this has gone well so far, but I'm worried about the next part, the next phase. I think I have a good plan, but I'm not sure. Or I had this problem, but I solved it. And then this other problem cropped up, but I think I have it under control. And when you listen to this, you realize there's really nothing here for me to solve. There really isn't. They're actually going in the right direction, and they're solving problems and knocking it down, but they don't have the confidence. They're not really aware that they're doing the right thing. They may be looking for a blessing from you. They may be looking for you to give encouragement. And so the main message you have here is go forward. You're doing a great job. Go forward. And I have to tell you, the first times I used that on my kids, they were so surprised. They're like, but Dad, I'm having this problem. I said, you're on the right track. Just keep going. Keep going. If you get stuck, let me know, but keep doing what you're doing. And it's a wonderful thing. They go out there and they keep going. So let me give you an example from my own parenting of my middle child, my son, Austin. And what I want you to do in this, and you can open up and give your answer at the end of it, but I want you to identify which quadrant did I think Austin was in of these four, and why did I do what I did? Okay, so listen to this as a case study and see what you think. So Austin was a senior in high school, and he wanted to attend his dream school, the big state university, but was unlikely to be accepted. But they have a special program where you can go to a satellite state school for a year, and if you get good enough grades in certain courses, then you can transfer into the main university as a sophomore. And it's actually more complicated than I'm putting it, because there's all these rules around transfers and what credits go. So I had studied the program, looked at it with my prior son, and I knew most of the answers. And then Austin came to me asking for me to guide him on the project. But I surprised him and I said, I'm not going to do all the investigation and decision making for you. You're going to do it. And then you can review it with me. And what he heard out of that was, you're on your own. But it wasn't really truly the case. That's what he perceived. And the reality is I wanted to get him to do the investigation of alternatives. And I was going to be involved, especially with the critical part about the transfer credits, because that meant money. If he didn't transfer it right, it meant he would spend more time in school and more money, either my money or his money. So I did want to make sure I was staying in close touch with that area of it. So let me pause for a few seconds while you study the diagram. So which quadrant did I think Austin was in when I chose to parent him this way? What do you think? Anybody have an opinion?
I say participate.
Yeah, that's where I thought he was. I thought he was in the blue in the participation, and he was able to do the task, but he wasn't willing or confident enough. And I wanted him to become proactive and to drive through towards the solution. I was in the kitchen with him more than he thought. I was much more side by side with him than he realized, but I was getting him to do the work. And I was using Stucker streaming techniques with him when he came to me with questions and issues throughout the process. So now I want you to compare this, because I think that was a seminal experience for him. 2 years later, less than 2 years later, he decided to buy a car with his own money. He did the research on the best car for him. He found a great deal, and he had to act decisively because the seller was about to move out of the country. So he asked me to help, but it was more in a consulting role and reviewing the paperwork to make sure he was finding all the buyer-seller paperwork for a straight transaction, just wanted me to review it, make sure he was right. And by then he was making great decisions on his own. And I really think that some of the things that we did in that participating phase helped him eventually get to where he was in a delegate phase and could do it on his own. And there's an extra little story about this, by the way. The seller actually had multiple potential buyers, but when he saw Austin and me working together in the way that we did, it reminded him of his own dad and their relationship. And he decided to sell the car to Austin rather than to anybody else. I don't even think Austin offered the most money, but he felt like this was the family he wanted his car to go to before he left the country. So that was kind of cool. So anyway, with this model, what I'd like you to do is to save and really refer to the model when you get it in your handouts. You're not going to memorize it all. Okay, I don't have it all memorized. It's something to just keep looking at where you can have a heightened awareness of what's going on with your child, some ideas on how to move them forward, and then what role you can play in that. That's what this model is really all about. And it's something you could go back and refer to over and over again. And I know I did as a manager and to a lesser degree as a parent, because I kind of did a lot of it naturally. My family used to say, "Why are you managing us?" You know, my wife said, "Quit managing me." So, okay. The last thing I want to cover, I've gone a little bit longer, is the reasonable discipline structure. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but by the way, I will say some of that discipline structure is going to be encompassed in this next piece here, which is on using driving, the next podcast, using driving privileges to encourage adult decision making. And I'll have that out sometime this week where you can take a listen to it. And in it, I'll discuss discipline and conformance techniques such as a driving contract. But for now, let me talk about how disciplining a teen differs from a younger child. And I talked yesterday a little bit about choices charred with clear rules and consequences. And what we found was it didn't work as well in some of the complex situations with teens that they can face or things that they can generate. So you're still doing the basics of taking privileges away for bad behavior. It's just that the range of bad behavior has increased exponentially beyond what it was before. So the thing is, if you made the consequences match the decision, the family consequences can't be big enough without you being just completely draconian and just taking away all their privileges or something. So what I think is the temptation is to just, you're having problems with your kid, I'm giving more and more and bigger consequences. But really, when you get to that phase, you really need to start going the opposite direction, in my opinion, which is with the phrase, life gives you bigger consequences than I can. And let me give you an example of a conversation like that. I'm going to punish you for driving home and having alcohol on your breath when you arrived. According to our driving contract, I'm taking away the keys for 2 weeks and you can't go to social events for a month. But let me tell you, there's no consequence I can give you that is greater than what life will give you. When you drink and drive, you could get a ticket. You could lose your license. You could injure or kill someone else or yourself. You could go to prison for years. And I can't protect you from those consequences. It will be out of my hands. Taking away your keys and your party privileges pale in comparison to what life will do if you keep on this path. Now, that is an attention-getting statement. And that's something where the kids really have to really, start listening, or else they're going to really be making horrendous decisions. So the key about that, can you see that this technique is not necessarily based on punishment? It's focused on improving the decision-making, showing the consequences of actions. And this is where the reasonable discipline structure changes somewhat in that partnership with your teen. You're putting up guardrails, knowing that they may still drive through the guardrails. And it doesn't matter how many times you take away the key, they're going to find another way to go over the guardrails. But there's consequences to those. And the consequences are a lot more than daddy or mommy issues. They're life consequences that are starting to happen. And this is what you're pointing them to.